Welcome to another deep dive, everyone. This time we're really digging into this fascinating book, Reviving Ophelia. It's all about the pressures and challenges that adolescent girls were going through back in the 1990s. And, it's a mix of psychological analysis with just these really relatable stories of girls and their families.
Yeah, and what really stood out to me was just how the book dives into the why behind it all.
Mhm.
It's not just about what these girls experienced, but it connects their struggles to the broader societal context, the family dynamics,
Yeah.
all the psychological forces that were at play back then.
Right. Okay, so let's get into it then. The book opens with this girl, Rosemary, and she experiences this really big change during puberty. She goes from being this confident, outgoing kid to suddenly being totally consumed by, worries about how she looks and how popular she is. It's that feeling of like suddenly being aware of everyone's eyes on you,
Yeah, especially those awkward teenage years. I feel like so many of us can relate to that. Definitely. And Rosemary's story, it's not just some random anecdote. It
Yeah.
really shows how puberty can trigger this big shift in how girls see themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And Reviving Ophelia says that's partly because of all those hormonal changes, of course,
Sure.
but it's also hugely influenced by all those societal messages that girls are getting about beauty and what it means to be feminine.
So it's nature and nurture kind of working together, I guess. And the book emphasizes how much the media environment in the 90s played a role too, right? Like with all the supermodels and music videos and stuff, makes you think about how all these external messages can really shape how girls see themselves.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And Reviving Ophelia goes even further by talking about this concept called lookism,
Mhm.
which is basically the idea that people are judged mostly on their looks.
Right.
It's a huge problem in general, but it's especially powerful when you're a teenager, right?
Mhm.
When you're already dealing with all these insecurities.
For sure. And in the book, Rosemary's parents, they tried to raise her to be assertive, which, on paper sounds great. But then as she becomes a teenager, that assertiveness actually starts causing problems. It clashes with the expectations of how girls should act, and it even causes some tension within her family. It's that struggle between raising strong, independent daughters and then facing a culture that often kind of undermines female assertiveness.
Totally. And that's a real challenge for parents and daughters.
Yeah.
The book doesn't pretend to have all the answers, but it does stress how important open communication is within families. And, parents need to be aware of all those subtle messages that their daughters are picking up from the culture and then actively try to counteract those messages.
Yeah, makes sense. So we're seeing how these pressures play out for Rosemary, but you might be wondering how this all works in different kinds of families,
Right.
right? So Reviving Ophelia goes deep into these complicated mother-daughter relationships by showing us some really different examples.
Uh-huh.
So we meet Jessica, who's always butting heads with Brenda, her mom, who's super involved in her life. Then we have Sorrel and her mom, Faith, who seem to have a better balance in their relationship, even as Sorrel is figuring out being a lesbian. And then on the other side, there's Whitney, whose mom, Evelyn, is emotionally distant, which leaves Whitney feeling isolated and alone.
Right. And those different examples show that there's no one-size-fits-all when it comes to mother-daughter relationships.
Yeah.
But what's consistent in the book is how adolescence is this time of massive change for both the daughter and the mother.
For sure.
Daughters want independence, but they still need their mom's guidance and support.
Yeah.
And moms are grappling with their own worries,
Yeah.
especially in the context of the 90s, with all the fears about date rape, teenage pregnancy, AIDS, and all that.
It's like everyone's trying to figure things out at the same time.
Exactly.
Which, obviously can lead to tension and misunderstandings. And of course, we can't forget about the fathers. Reviving Ophelia looks at their roles too and shows how much their presence or absence affects their daughters. We meet Katie, who has this incredibly close bond with her dad, Pete, even though he's dealing with a serious illness. Their relationship is like a breath of fresh air in the book, don't you think?
Totally. Katie and Pete's story really shows you how powerful a supportive father-daughter relationship can be.
Yeah.
It's like her dad's emotional presence gives her strength and resilience, especially as she's going through adolescence.
Yeah.
And it's so different from some of the other dads in the book, like Holly's dad, Dale. He's emotionally distant, which leads Holly to look for love and attention in this risky relationship. It shows how much a dad's absence, both physically and emotionally, can affect a daughter's self-esteem and even the choices she makes.
Right. And then there's Clara, whose dad, Kurt, has these really old-fashioned views on gender roles, like what a girl should and shouldn't do. His attitude really holds Clara back and makes her feel like she has to fit into this box that's not right for her. It makes you think about how even within families, societal expectations can really stifle a girl's individuality
Right.
and potential.
Absolutely. Claire's story brings up a key point from the book.
Mm.
We need to challenge those gender stereotypes that get passed down through generations. It's about encouraging girls to break free and define success on their own terms.
Mm-hmm. It's a reminder that sometimes the biggest obstacles for a girl's growth can come from her own family. And speaking of obstacles, the book also tackles the impact of divorce on teen girls. Julia's story is really powerful. She's going through her parents' separation, moving to a new town, starting a new school, and trying to fit into a blended family.
Hmm.
It's a lot for anyone to handle, especially at such a vulnerable age.
Yeah, Julia's experience really shows how much divorce can affect a teenager's emotional well-being.
Right.
It often leads to feelings of loss and grief and uncertainty. And in Julia's case, she loses contact with her dad, who seems more focused on his new life than being there for her. She clashes with her stepbrothers. It's clear she's overwhelmed by all the changes happening in her life.
Her story is a good reminder that divorce isn't just some legal thing. It's a deeply emotional experience for everyone, especially the kids. Reviving Ophelia really stresses the importance of communication, empathy, and support during these transitions, and it underscores how much both parents need to stay involved in their kids' lives, even if the family looks different now.
Absolutely. And even beyond divorce, the book looks at depression in teenage girls, which sadly was and still is really common. We meet Monica, who's incredibly smart, but struggles with being lonely and having low self-esteem. Her story shows how much pressure from society and the struggles of navigating social situations can lead to depression. She's surrounded by people, but feels deeply alone.
Monica's experience reminds us that depression doesn't always look the same. It can be hidden even when someone seems successful on the outside. The book says it's important for parents, teachers, and friends to be aware of those subtle signs of depression in young people and to create environments where they feel comfortable asking for help.
Right. And then we have Cindy, whose experience is even more intense. The book describes it as failure to thrive, meaning she's not developing and growing the way she should, both physically and emotionally. She's neglected, doesn't have support, and her depression comes from these deep emotional wounds that haven't been dealt with.
Cindy's story is heartbreaking. It shows us that depression can show up in different ways and how serious it can be. And it underscores how devastating neglect and lack of support can be for a child's development.
It really highlights the need to intervene early and how crucial a strong support system is for kids struggling with their mental health.
Absolutely. Reviving Ophelia doesn't shy away from these tough topics because they're crucial to understanding what it's like to be a teenager, especially for girls.
And that's what makes this book so important. It brings these issues to light, encourages open conversations, and ultimately gives us hope by suggesting ways to support and empower young women as they navigate this challenging time in their lives.
So much to think about already.
Yeah, for sure.
It's clear that these girls in Reviving Ophelia are under a lot of pressure to fit these, unrealistic expectations, especially when it comes to their bodies.
Yeah, and it's not just thinness either. It's this whole package deal.
Yeah.
Pretty popular, athletic, successful, and effortlessly cool at the same time.
Right. Who can live up to all that? And as we're seeing, it can lead to some really unhealthy behaviors. The book doesn't hold back from showing how that pressure can turn into self-destructive stuff.
Like Heidi's bulimia. She feels so overwhelmed by everything that she tries to control things by focusing on her weight.
It's heartbreaking. Makes you wonder how many girls go to these extremes because they just don't see any other way to deal with all the expectations.
That's a really important point. But it's interesting how Reviving Ophelia doesn't just dwell on the negative. It shows the strength of these girls, too. Their ability to find joy and connection even when things are tough.
Like Sorrel, who finds that sense of belonging in the lesbian community. And her passion for art, that's a source of strength for her, too.
It shows how finding your people can make such a difference. And also how creativity can be an outlet for emotions and for finding meaning.
And sometimes that support comes from surprising places, like Katie and her dad, Pete. Such a beautiful example of that.
Even though he's sick, their bond is so strong. It shows that love and connection can get you through anything.
Yeah, it's like a ray of hope. And it reminds you how vital those strong relationships are, especially when you're a teenager.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about key takeaways from the book, that's a big one. The importance of having a solid support system.
Not just any support system, though, right? It has to be people who really get you, who encourage you to be yourself.
Exactly. Not just having people around, but people who understand you, celebrate your strengths, and support you through the tough times.
Because let's face it, we all go through tough times, but the book argues that girls are often hit with so many messages about who they should be that it's hard to stay true to themselves.
Right.
And that's where the call to action comes in, right? It's not just for parents and teachers, but for all of us. We need to be more aware of the pressures that girls face and create spaces where they feel safe and supported to be themselves.
Mm-hmm. It's about challenging those limited definitions of femininity and recognizing that there are many ways to be a girl. We need to celebrate all those different experiences and expressions that make each girl unique.
I love that. So how do we start to change things? Reviving Ophelia seems to suggest that giving girls the space to find their own voices is a good starting point.
Absolutely. We need to empower them to speak up, to share their experiences, and challenge anything that tries to limit them. That's how real change happens.
And that message of empowerment is still so relevant today, maybe even more so because, let's be real, those pressures haven't gone away. They've just changed with the times.
Exactly.
Right.
Think about social media and all the technology. Girls are facing a whole new set of challenges now. Cyberbullying, body image comparisons, the pressure to look perfect online. It's a lot.
It can be overwhelming for sure, but reviving Ophelia reminds us that we're not alone. There are people who care, who want to help, who believe in girls and their power to make a difference.
That's what we need to remember. It's a message of hope, of resilience, of believing in the strength and potential of every girl, no matter what she's going through.
So well said. So maybe if we want to really honor these stories from reviving Ophelia, it starts with simply listening. Really listening to the girls in our lives. Hearing their experiences, validating their feelings, creating safe spaces for them to open up.
Because when girls feel heard and seen, they're more likely to share their struggles and to reach out for the support they need to navigate being a teenager.
And that's where real change starts. It's not about fixing girls. It's about empowering them. It's about building a world where they feel valued and respected and supported to thrive. That's something worth fighting for.
Couldn't agree more. A group effort, but it's essential if we want a future where girls can truly flourish.
We've talked about so much in this deep dive into reviving Ophelia, haven't we? From puberty and families to all the pressures girls face and those real struggles with depression, self-harm eating disorders, it really doesn't hold back.
It doesn't. And one thing it does really well is show how girls get these mixed messages about what it means to be feminine. They're told to be strong and independent, but then they're judged for being too assertive or speaking their minds.
It's like they can't win, right? No wonder so many girls end up feeling lost and confused about who they're supposed to be.
Exactly. And the book says if we want to support girls, we need to recognize that double standard and work to change it.
So instead of trying to force girls into this one specific mold, we should be encouraging them to embrace all their different sides.
Reviving Ophelia reminds us that girls are complex. They have thoughts, feelings, dreams, ambitions, all these things that deserve to be nurtured and celebrated.
Because there's no one right way to be a girl. And the more we encourage girls to explore their own unique paths, the more likely they'll find happiness.
The book suggests that when girls feel safe to be themselves, that's when they can truly thrive.
And that thriving can look different for every girl, right? For some, it might be doing great in school. For others, it might be expressing themselves through art or music or activism. The important thing is that they have the support to figure out what thriving means for them.
And if we're thinking about how to apply these lessons from reviving Ophelia to our own lives, I think it starts with small acts of kindness and understanding.
Like reaching out to the girls in our families and communities, offering a listening ear, a shoulder to cry on, a word of encouragement.
It's about showing them they're not alone, that their experiences matter, and that we care.
Yeah.
And sometimes all it takes is that little bit of belief to spark something amazing.
That's a great way to put it. Reviving Ophelia has given us so much to think about. It reminds us that girls' stories matter, their voices deserve to be heard, and their futures are worth fighting for. So let's keep talking, let's keep listening, and let's work together to create a world where all girls feel empowered to shine. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Reviving Ophelia.